Hello and welcome to Coffee with Dr. Carla. I'm Dr. Carla, and today my goal is to talk about some mental health issues and hopefully work on getting rid of some of the stigma surrounding them. So I often have a guest on and I ask them to share their stories, and I'm always looking for people to share their stories with me, and I thought, well, I'm asking others to share their stories, so I thought I would share a bit of my story. So, I am a sugar addict, and whenever I tell somebody that, the first thing that they say is, oh, we all have sweet tooths. No, if you have a sweet tooth, you might like your, strudel coffee cake or your ice cream, but you don't obsess over it. You don't eat it to the point where you're sick. You don't lie and cheat to get it, right? Like there's, so you enjoy sweets over savory. Great. That's awesome. But when we're talking about addiction, we're talking about that person who, with whatever substance or whatever behavior, can't stop like everybody else. So I'm sure as adults we've all been out someplace and maybe had a drink with dinner. Many of us can stop at one or two drinks. Even people who maybe have a few too many drinks and might find themselves drunk or tipsy. It's not at the level of compulsion. They wouldn't characterize themselves as an alcoholic, right? That's the same thing with people who talk about being sweet tooths. Maybe they overindulge here and there, but there's certain characteristics or compulsions that aren't there for them that are there for those of us who are addicts. When I decided to go back to school to get into counseling, I made it my mission to do as much research as possible for papers that I had to write around this idea of food addiction, specifically sugar addiction, and whatnot. And what I found was, there was nothing to find. Like there was almost no research out there. People did not want to take it seriously. Unfortunately, when it comes to stigmas and food, it's a really strong place. What we tend to get is a lot of shaming of people who can't control their food intake, and we get a lot of shaming around weight, obesity, etc. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of good research out there. However, Dr. Pamela Peeke, actually, she has a few colleagues that have joined her, but basically she's one of the few people that I have found that actually talks about the idea of sugar addiction. And what's really, for me, what was freeing was that she talked about how if you put 3 people in a functional MRI, the first person is typical, and I'm not sure how many of those people really exist in the world, but apparently, these research projects can find somebody who's typical, right? And then we put somebody in there who has a cocaine addiction, and then we put somebody in the last one who has a sugar addiction. And within this functional MRI process, they are talking about getting their substance of choice. So talking to the person with the cocaine addiction, like, okay, yeah, you get it and you do whatever, right? So they're just hearing this scenario around being able to get and use cocaine. Same thing with the person with the sugar addiction. And what they found was that those of us with sugar addictions, our brains light up in exactly the same way that people with cocaine addictions. So the same areas, same intensity, etc. And so hearing that, knowing that, allowed for me to better embrace the idea that this is real, not just something that I made up. There also was a doctoral candidate, and her name is escaping me right now, but she created the Yale Food Scale, and it's a questionnaire that you can use, and you basically identify whatever your trigger food is, right? So for me, it would be sugar. For somebody else, it might be starches or savory food, whatever the case may be. And then you answer a series of questions, and the way she formulated, and it's the go-to for assessments around food addiction. The way she did this is that she formulated it off of the criteria needed from the DSM, our diagnostic manual that we use for diagnosing mental health issues. She took the same criteria that folks would use for alcohol or cocaine or heroin or whatever the case may be, and she, through her research and construction of this assessment, she was able to talk about food instead. And so, just in case you don't know, because I'm sure you're all walking around with a DSM in your back pocket, right? The sticking points or the criteria that's needed for any substance or behavior to be considered an addiction is there has to be a loss of control, meaning that despite your best attempts, you're not controlling it. I had a group of guys that I worked with in my internship, and it was about they were court-ordered drug and alcohol addiction, and the guys would always say that one was too many and a million wasn't enough, right? And so for me, one piece of candy was way too many, and I could literally sit there and have bags of candy, and it wouldn't be enough. There would be no way to shut that down. So that's that loss of control. Tried or worried unsuccessfully, and that's basically this idea of quitting, right? So I contemplated, I wanted to quit. I knew better. I knew that this was not helping me. If I look back in time, I can see that for decades, people had suggested that maybe I need to consider how I'm, taking in those sweets. Maybe we should be more mindful of how that goes. And sometimes I worried and sometimes I didn't, right? But when I did try, I would have periods of time where I was really good and I was spot on, and then I would fall off the wagon, right? So if we talk about stages of change, I would be good, and then I would have this massive relapse, right? The next criteria is large amounts of time spent trying to get that substance. So what makes this sugar addiction for me even more challenging is that I'm diabetic, and yes, I know there's diabetics out there who still eat sugar and they just take an extra insulin shot and whatnot. That's not how I want to live my life. When I was first diagnosed, I did a really good job of towing the line and making sure that I didn't have any sugar, and that I really reduced my starches and whatnot. And I went through a long period where I had trouble with maintaining that stance, and then I went through other times where it was really easy. I'll say easy to do. And so when we look at that, this is a massive journey. And so for me to be addicted to sugar and have diabetes, I'm just asking for trouble. Even though there's more criteria that she had listed, I'm going to stop there for today, and just kind of leave you with this thought that when it comes to addiction, even though we know, the addict knows that what we're doing is not useful and that it's harmful, we also know that that loss of control is debilitating. It's shaming. It's overwhelming, and so sometimes we get caught up in this, shame cycle, this looping about how horrible of a person we are. We should know better, and all that other stuff. And so when you get stuck there, you can't see clearly. So that's where I'm going to stop with my story today. And hopefully, if this is an issue that you're dealing with, that you reach out and get some help. And because there's no reason why you have to go through this alone in any way, shape, or form. So remember, you can change your thoughts, discover your potential, and transform your life by focusing on your overall well-being. So until next time, continue working on being the best you possible.